What is it, BookTube? It is me, it is Monty, and I'm finally back. I say finally, it's September, so I literally in August was over on the behind the paywall, giving the people daily content. So I have been making videos, and I did the same thing in June, and I think I had a video go up in May over here. So, but yeah, there's like 60 or so videos behind the paywall for those of you who have missed my lovely face. But in the time since I've last, and this is kind of fortuitous to be honest with you, but I'm pretty sure that I've read 72 books um, over the year so far. And I think that the last time I updated you guys, I updated about 36 of those things. And today, I am also here to update about 36 things. So even though it's been a minute and I didn't do the mid-year freak out or whatever, this is kind of like my mid-year check-in to let you guys know, let the public know, keep up with you guys. So I'm currently waiting for my Goodreads to load while I'm just gonna go over those things. Like I did the last time I did one of these extensive wrap-ups. I don't know how long this video is because I'm, 5 minutes into filming. What I will do, which is the same thing I did last time, is down in the description there should be timestamps in case you want to jump around. I will also leave links to Patreon videos in case you want to join the Patreon where I talk about these things, because some of these things will be the book that they voted on for me to read. I will also leave links to regular videos in case you somehow did not watch them in my absence, because a few of these things actually have dedicated vlogs to them. Last time I talked to you guys, I was in the middle of Late Bloomer by Maisie Eddings, so that was where we left off. And from there, all the way back, oh my goodness, I read this from April 29th to May 7th. I read the Pairing by Casey McQuiston. I do know I vlogged this. I do know people watched it. It's doing pretty well still. I did not like this book. I gave this book a single star. I think that Casey McQuiston has lost the plot entirely. And I think that what really did this in for me is that it's dual perspective, but it's dual perspective for we get one perspective for half of the book, and then for the other half of the book, we get the other character. So it was a little bit weird. The setting is supposed to be these people. In the prologue, we meet them flying to Europe for the first time, and they've been dating for a significant amount of time. And on that flight to Europe, they break up and they go their separate ways over miscommunication. And so in the present of the story, when we are coming back in after the prologue, we are seeing these characters going back to Europe to go on the tour that they didn't really get to go on the last time, except now they're each in different places in their lives, and it's them coming back together, seeing if they can like maybe make things work, but also like there's still the feelings from the last time around. The miscommunication these people have is fucking stupid. It is resolved very early on in the book, but we continue on with this farce. The farce becomes even more farcical the longer you read about these characters and their hookups throughout this little European vacation that they're on. None of it is actually anything that makes sense. The deeper you get into the story, the more unserious it becomes. And I just never connected with either of these characters. I also, here's the thing, like, one of the characters is some sort of non-binary, but the way that this is like explained in the text of the story, it makes you feel like their love interest is misgendering them for a significant portion of the book. And when we do get that character just like discussing their gender, it is in the other character's point of view. And I can understand that, because if you are a non-binary person just going through life, like that's probably not something that is enveloping your every waking moment. But we're seeing this person like making connections with other people, and so you would think it would come up in there, but also they're on this like group vacation, but it has the same problem that so much of like modern adult romance has, where the other people on the vacation don't play any kind of part in the story. And it is kind of a plot beat later on where the rest of the people are talking to them like, yeah, I thought it was weird that you guys only talked to each other and didn't talk to us. And so like it is, sure, it's acknowledged in the thing, but it just gives lampshading. And so I do think that Casey McQuiston kind of peaked early, and it's been a series of diminishing returns. I then, after that, marathoned, and I do mean marathoned. Finlay Donovan knocks him. Finlay Donovan is killing it. Finlay Donovan knocks him dead. Finlay Donovan jumps the gun. Veronica Ruiz breaks the bank, and then I got Finlay Donovan rolls the dice. I think I gave most of these 4 stars. Yes, I gave all of those 4 stars. I think it was a public video where I read most of the Finlay Donovan books, in which case I will leave it linked. It might have been a Patreon video. I can't remember. Don't hold me to it. But I remember reading those books and I just had a really good time. I did not think I was going to like it just because I had seen so many people already read Finlay Donovan and I'd seen people talk about it. And so many other people seem to have like diminishing returns with the series. I do think that around book 3, it was kind of getting a little bit unserious. We were kind of like at this point, it is we need to either move the story forward or just stop it, like just stop it here. But I do think that by the time we got to book four, more things were progressing, more characters were kind of getting arcs. Like we were finally starting to wrap up some loose ends and move forward. And so I think that by the time we get to book five, Finlay Donovan digs her own grave. I will be excited. I will be tuned in. I will be ready to read it. The one thing I will say is that if you are going to start this series, I would really recommend to read the novella Veronica Rees Breaks the Bank first. It will kind of like spoil how Veronica and Finley know each other, but by the point that I read it, I feel like I didn't need to read it anymore, and I appreciated the story. Like there is a whole plot in there aside from how Finley and Veronica meet and get to know one another. Um, but at that point, I think that most people are just like kind of checked out. And so even though it was published later in like along in the series life, I would recommend that people hop on that earlier than when I did. But yeah, I understand why people don't like it. It is a little bit somewhat diminishing returns each time, but I just really like Finley and I like Veronica. I don't like Finley's husband. I think that he definitely needs to get shot in the face. And I also don't like the cop love interest. I'd much preferred the bartender lawyer. And I really hope that he makes a comeback at some point. I don't think he's going to. I think they had some kind of like meta discussion. Um, meta discussion over that and his inclusion. But overall, like I said, it was a good time. I understand why this was kind of a booktube darling there for a second. Then I read Amari and the Night Brothers. I think this won the Patreon poll, and I'm pretty sure I read this in the same week that I was reading the Finlay Donovan. And so I don't know what vlog that wound up going in, because I also was reading When the Moon Hatched, I want to say, in the same time frame. So I don't know if it got put in the Moon Hatch vlog or forgot, but I don't know. The past is the past to me. But I did not like Amari and the Night Brothers. I wound up giving it 2 stars. I thought it was just okay. For me, my biggest issue here was I don't really feel like the Night Brothers, this like magical, supernatural, whatever it was that our main character Amari got sent off to. It was kind of giving like the police are here to save you. It was kind of giving the police are going to lift you out of poverty. And that to me just felt like a very strange narrative to give to a book targeting like young Black children. I've since learned that apparently like book 2, Amari and the Great Game, shies away from like, oh, isn't she the poorest girl in Poor Town kind of narrative. But I think that was a little bit strange. I did like Amari as a character. I liked kind of the sort of group that she was friends with. It was kind of giving a very similar problem to Legendborn, where I was kind of like, okay, but can Amari have some Black friends? Because it didn't feel like she had any. It was kind of giving like she was in this like racist institution. And the book does end with her also going back to her little, projects and taking, one of her besties from the projects with her into this like police academy situation. And so like maybe it gets better. I don't know. But at the time that I read it, I was not really feeling it. Then I was very generous and I read Lies and Weddings by Kevin Kwan, and I gave this book 4 stars. Here's the thing with the Kevin Kwan book. I think that a Kevin Kwan is very similar to a Finlay Donovan in that it's giving diminishing returns. Kevin Kwan wrote the Crazy Rich Asian series, and it really put him out there. But I really do think that if you have read one Kevin Kwan book, you've kind of read them all at this point, and so you do have to understand like what you're getting yourself into when you pick up a Kevin Kwan book. This is loosely connected to the other book that he wrote, Sex and Vanity, a couple years ago, in that both of these are chronicling people who are going to a wedding at an exotic location for one reason or another. In Lies and Weddings, it does feel like we have more characters that we're following. Sex and Vanity was really like a two-hander. It was just like our main female character and our main male character. In Lies and Weddings, we are back to the Crazy Rich Asian situation of we are following multiple people from the family and their various endeavors and how they are coming to know one another. Lies and Weddings is much messier a book than Sex and Vanity, or at least what I remember Sex and Vanity, because I did not like Sex and Vanity nearly as much as his other stuff. In this, you are definitely going to get... Here's the thing. If you do not want to read a Kevin Kwan book, just don't ever pick it up. But if you are interested, you do need to know that you have to read the footnotes. The footnotes are very much a part of the story, and it's also a book with many pop culture reference, like many designer, many location, many a school. Schools are very important in the world of a Kevin Kwan book. Even if you, the reader, do not understand like why you're supposed to care about these people and their educational histories, they are an essential part of the character, and they do inform how they interact with one another, and it is how they view the world. So it is, again, very one note. If you've read one Kevin Kwan, you've kind of read them all. But if you were going to start with one and it wasn't going to be Crazy Rich Asians, which I do think is his better series, Lies and Weddings is probably the better place because it is, I would say, the more Sex and Vanity and Lies and Weddings both function better as standalones, even though Crazy Rich Asians, Trying to Rich Girlfriend, and Rich People Problems are also standalone. They are more interdependent upon one another, and it is more important, I think, for you to read those in order. Whereas I think you could just jump straight to Lies and Weddings and have a good time and never even think about Sex and Vanity because the connection between the two is just so thin. I think it's really just like a character is mentioned. Then I read When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker because at the time, the Busy Bee Discord server, which is Aaron's Patreon Discord, had been reading this. And they had been reading it for what felt like my entire lifetime. And everybody and their mother was reading it on like Instagram, I thought, and I was kind of seeing it on YouTube a little bit. I did read When the Moon Hatched, and I did not like this book whatsoever. I have a whole vlog, I talk about it. I don't think that Sarah A. Parker is necessarily a good author. I think that she knows how to put words on a page, and she doesn't know when to stop putting words on a page. And I think that this book, Blowing Up, was just deeply unserious. It is not very good in terms of like a fantasy perspective. There are definitely multiple plot lines happening concurrently, some of them side by side, some of them, it just feels very messy the way that it's put together. It reads like a book that was written to get paid off of page reads, and so it does make me wonder, like, how are you going to now switch this up in the middle of the publication history to make this a traditionally published book? Maybe it'll be cleaner. I doubt it'll be cleaner because I think that part of the elements of this being so messy and chaotic are what got people to read it. But I don't think the romance was particularly compelling. I think that our main character trying to avenge her friend was deeply unserious, and just overall was not a very good time. Next, I'm going to talk about the J. Bree books altogether. So I read The Scepter, which was the first novella, The Sword, which is the point two, The Crown of Oaths and Curses, and The Throne of Honor and Blood, which is I think it's the Crown of Oaths and Curses series. I don't know. The two novellas, The Sword and The Scepter, are perfectly fine. They service to set up the world that we're living in. We are meeting our Fae Prince as he is learning who his mate is going to be and how long he's going to have to wait for them. And then that's The Sword. And in The Scepter, we are meeting our main female character as her family is like kind of slaughtered. They are witches that live in the wood, the Ravenswood witches, I want to say, and they are slaughtered in their woods, and it's kind of a big deal. They're like, what the fuck is going on? And so we're meeting our main character as her and her brother Pemba flee the woods and try to get to the northern lands because the south is killing all the witches. Then in the Crown of Oaths and Curses, we are meeting our main character, our female character, as she comes back. I don't know what her name is, to be honest with you. But she's coming back from the northern lands. She's been up in the north for hundreds of years at this point, or maybe just be like a couple hundred. I don't know. She's been up in the north for a minute, helping them with their war because up in the north, the king like refused his mate, and so the universe was attacking him. But the king of the north got it all settled. They're living in peace and harmony, and she's like, okay, I can't put off my fate any longer. I'm gonna go back down to the southern lands, even though she knows when she goes back to the southern lands, she will be imprisoned because she is a witch, and the people in the southern lands don't fuck with the witches because 900 years ago, a witch allegedly murdered the king and queen fae person of the southern lands. And so she shows back up, and the prince, like I said, immediately throws her in a dungeon. But it's kind of a problem because the prince realizes that the mating bond has snapped into place, and it's going to be big to do here because she's a witch and he's a fae, and they don't fuck with each other like that. And this book just gave, listen, a lot of fantasy does this like oppressor relationship thing, but in this book it was particularly bad. It was particularly egregious. It felt extra gross and disgusting, and it was like 3 sentences away from him calling her slurs at multiple points in the story. And for most of this book, she is trapped in the dungeon, literally doing not a damn thing. When she does leave the dungeon, it is like it's very self-sacrificing to like prove that she can help the fae. But the first book is like really there's no relationship happening. And then the problem with the second book is it's almost like a switch is flipped immediately and the characters are acting completely differently. It is poorly edited. At least it was at the time. I think at this point, J. Bree has since gone in and like re-edited the book, which I think sure is fine. But at the same time, this is a book that had been pushed like multiple times. She was holding release parties while she was nowhere to be found. The book was nowhere to be found. Her team was like putting up things talking about, oh, it's coming out on this day and it was not out on this day. People were getting copies days late. It was a very messy release, and apparently I don't think this was her first time pushing a release date and having it being messy. This was also, I feel like, the first Romantasy this year well, not the first fantasy, but it was the first that I paid attention to that had this happen. And since this, the Throne of Honor and Blood, this book also had to be retitled because it had Nazi connections, which makes complete sense when you're reading this book. And the Fey Prince sounds like a fucking, he sounds like a skinhead, like he just sounds like a neo-Nazi. Um, so I don't really buy Jay Bree's excuse that, oh, I didn't know, but her main characters were giving skinhead, and so I don't believe that she didn't understand that the title she had come up with had connections to the neo-Nazi movement. Like, let's be fucking for real here. You and your 3 months need to put your heads together and figure that shit out. I probably will read the third book at some point when it ever comes out, if it ever comes out, but I'm not going to be holding my breath over it. Then I moved on and I read Before I Let Go and This Could Be Us for the Lily Reads Book Club. Now, Before I Let Go was a selection last year, which is why This Could Be Us was a selection this year. And even though romance contemporaries, like, they can often be read without the other one, I do like to just have the knowledge, just understand like what the kind of the context of this friend group and like what is happening is. And Before I Let Go is probably one of the worst romances I've ever read, to be honest with you. Here's the thing. Second chance romances and I are going to beef just because I'm the friend who is going to tell you not to take that man back. Like, I'm just that person. I do not think that you should do that. Now, is it to say that people have never gotten back together and like lived happily ever after? No, like, obviously that has happened. But the way that this man acted and what broke them apart was just deeply unserious to me. So in this book, we're following a man and a wife. This is Before I Let Go. And we're following them, and we find out that they were divorced because she had a miscarriage, because she slipped and fell one day, and then she was in grief because she had a miscarriage, which is totally understandable. Like, it was so far along that she had to like push out a stillborn baby. Like, that's a lot to go through. So she was in the middle of her grieving, and her husband just got sick and tired of her being in the middle of her grieving and just like came into the nursery and started tearing shit up and like painting things over. And it was just very clear that neither one of these people were like handling this well. Fast forward a couple months or a year or so, or maybe, and he has moved on. He's dating somebody else. He's talking about, oh, I'm in love with her. This man is bringing her to family dinners. And all the while, he's just like down bad for his ex-wife, still talking about, oh, I want to fuck her. I want to fuck her. I want to fuck her. But meanwhile, when she was in like the depths of her depression, what were you doing? Like, what were you doing besides being mad that she was in the depths of her depression? I don't think these people need to get back together. I don't think this is a romance. I think that it was actually very disgusting. Then I had to read This Could Be Us, which I gave 2 stars, which is honestly me being a little bit generous because I don't think that the main male character in this book was much better. In this book, we're following a woman whose husband was stealing money from like a Tupperware company. I think they sold like Tupperware. And he had like siphoned off millions of dollars and he was going to jail. And so she and her eventual love interest had met at the company Christmas party and they kind of flirted. And I'm gonna say the flirtation at the beginning was kind of cute. It was kind of cute. But then this man turned into a stalker. Like, this man turned into a stalker and was like very like, oh, I'm gonna take care of you, I'm gonna support you, I'm gonna do everything for you, out of fucking nowhere. And it was kind of weird, to be honest with you. It was giving that this man had like discovered that this woman's husband, or he had already been hurt at this point, to find out like the fraud that was happening. And so he took down her husband and then it was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna swoop in and be like the new person. It was also a story where both of these main characters, was it both of them? I think it was him, the love interest. He had like an autistic son, and maybe she had an autistic child too, but I don't remember. And they were just like presenting differently, maybe, or he had like autistic twins. There were more than one autistic child in this book, and it just did not sit well with me how they were being portrayed. And listen, I understand that Kennedy Ryan is talking about, oh, I'm a mom to autistic children and I waited my whole career to write this. And I just think it's deeply unserious for her to say that she just felt so scared and afraid to write about her experience as an autistic mother when she was out here writing about an oil baron getting in love with the native person who was protesting the pipeline. You chose to write that book. You are not an indigenous woman out here writing the indigenous person protesting the pipeline, falling in love with the oil baron, but writing about your own lived experience. That was the big, bold step. Get the fuck out of here, Kennedy Ryan. Didn't like it. Then we moved on to the month of June. And in the month of June, like, we're really in June now. And I was trying to participate in the Amazing Readathon, and I'm going to be very honest with you. It was too much for me. It was too much. I hated my life. I was hating everything I was doing. And so I just stopped. But the first thing I read for that was The CEO by Emily Hayes. This was a Libro FM selection at some point. They gave it to us for free. And this was a sapphic story. So I was like, it's short, it's sapphic, it's a romance. Like, how bad can it be? And it wasn't that very bad. It wasn't very bad at all. It wasn't for me. I don't really care about novellas. This had to do with like a woman. I think she worked in like advertising maybe, or she was hiring somebody who worked in advertising. And they just had like a lot of sex, and they went back to her hometown and they had sex in the hometown. Like, whatever happened in this book has completely gone by me. Even when I read it, I didn't really rate it because there was no real substance to this one. Then I think I have like the unpopular opinion about Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I had a good time. This was another 4-star read for me. I did not enjoy this as much as I enjoyed The Only One Left. Was that the one with like the gothic cover from last year, the red one with the house on the hill? Still my favorite Riley Sager cover. But Middle of the Night, we're following a man as he comes back home. His parents have moved to Florida and he's kind of living in their old home as he maybe gets ready to sell it. Maybe he's going to stay there. But we are seeing him as he starts to um, remember and like relive what happened in his childhood when his best friend went missing from the tent that they were camping in their backyard. And we spend the rest of the book with him reconnecting with his neighbors. We get point of views from most of the neighbors, and we are seeing him as he kind of like works back through time. We get flashbacks to the same night, to the night where he disappeared, where everyone was at the time they disappeared. And I listened to this, I think, in like one day at work, and I was entertained. Like, I was engaged with the story. I was enjoying the story. The twists and the turns are working for me. It wasn't superly outlandish. And I think it made sense. It made a lot more. There was more that made sense in this book than made sense in The Only One Left. Like, at the end of that book, there is a lot of like, you do kind of have to stretch a little bit to be like, okay, like, sure, that all makes sense. But in the middle of the night, I feel like it was perfectly fine. It was a good time. And maybe if I had read it over a couple of days, I might not have enjoyed it as much as I did. But for a book to just get me through the workday, it was everything I needed and more. Another book that got me through the workday was Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I'm pretty sure this is Aaron and I's only buddy read for the year, which is wild because we were supposed to do like so many more. I think we did like 5 or 6 last year, and we're supposed to do one every month this year, but I'm pretty sure Once Upon a Broken Heart is the only time that we actually buddy read something, and I wound up really enjoying this. I gave this 4 to 5 stars. I had a fun time. The thing I hated about this the most was who I knew the love interest was going to be, but I enjoyed the setting. I liked what we were doing here, and it didn't stay. It didn't stick. We did not stick the landing, but I was having a good time with Once Upon a Broken Heart. I enjoyed this little setup of our main character making this wish and then having to like kind of fix her wish and, you know, go about everything that came with it, and I had a good time. Then I read Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto. And y'all, when I tell you I was so disappointed. So I read Forget Me Not last year. That was another 1-day workbook, I'm pretty sure. It might have been a 2-day workbook. But I read that at work last year and I had a delightful little time. I was like, oh my goodness, how did I just, or was it last year? It might have been earlier this year even. But I was like, this is so good. Like, how did I not read this so long ago? And so I reached out to the publisher on NetGalley and I asked for the book and they sent it to me, and I was like, well, now was a good time to read Not Another Love Song. And this book was so bad, and I knew it was going to be bad when I was reading. I think it was the beginning. It was like it was like not an acknowledgement, but like I think at the beginning of the book, you know, and was talking about how this is the first book that she wrote, actually, and this is one that got her an agent, and it had been rejected X number of times, but this was like the book of her heart and her soul, and it started off as Raylo fan fiction. And as soon as I saw the fucking Raylo, I knew it was not going to be good. I knew it wasn't, and maybe that's just me. Maybe that's literally just me, but I am not a Raylo girly because I am not stupid. I'm sorry. I'm just not. I'm not stupid. Like, sorry to the Raylos out there, but y'all need to blame the early day Raylo girlies for ruining that shit for y'all, because I will forever associate them with the white supremacists. And so I went into this book not feeling great, already annoyed, but I think that this book was actively bad. Here we're following a woman who plays I think she actually just plays the violin or maybe the viola. And she is in the Manhattan Pops Orchestra, and she is the pop orchestra girly. And she has this older, sort of like, used to be a grandparent figure-esque person who took her in and gave her all these lessons, and like that's why she does life. And I think this mentor was also in the pop orchestra and like maybe help her get her in there. But her and the cello player Xander, he had a brief minuscule appearance at the end of Forget Me Not at the influencer wedding. So he is here to be in the pop orchestra. He's like the star of the pop orchestra, even though he doesn't really fuck with the pop orchestra. He likes his other stuff. And we get like 6 chapters from Xander, and I would have cut every single one of them. They added absolutely nothing to the story. The relationship between the two of them never made any sense to me. It felt very silly, very like, what are we even doing here? It read like somebody's first book, which when your first book that was actually published was so good, like, is a clear downgrade. And it didn't work. It didn't. Maybe it's because I knew that it was the Raylo and I could see the connections, and it's just like you didn't clean this up enough from the fan fiction that this was, because this didn't make any sense. Like the main female character didn't make any sense. Xander as a character didn't make any sense. He had no kind of motivation to be the asshole that he was, except that he was a Kylo Ren person. And so like, okay, congratulations on being Kylo Ren, but you're not Kylo Ren anymore. You're Xander Rose, and Xander Rose just didn't make any sense as a character. The arc that these two characters went on together didn't make any fucking sense, and it was just a bunch of foolishness. Then I read The Ballad of Never After, the second book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, and this was decidedly worse. It picks up right where the second book left off, and what I think the first book did really well was it set up a mystery. So yes, we have our main character going to this other part of the world and learning their customs and kind of getting embroiled in this kind of mess. But we also understand that she is the key to a prophecy, and the prophecy could be very interesting. So what are we going to do with this? And so it ends with her kind of doing some stuff with the prophecy. In the second book, we kind of pick up and we are moving along, and we get some more world building happening here. We get some more things that are going on in this world. We get vampires introduced. It's interesting. Still very interesting. It's giving questy a little bit. It's giving fun times. I had a good time. I listened to it at work. I was minding my business, having a delightful little time. And then we end with another cliffhanger. And I was like, well, you got me, girl. Like, you got me. I got to read the next one. And we'll get there eventually. But that one I gave 3 out of 5 stars. So in June, I read Fucking Around by Dr. Professor Emily Rath. And this book I gave 1 star. So in this one, we're following Rachel Price, who is working at a clinic in Cleveland, I think, or Cincinnati. I want to say it's Cleveland or Cincinnati. She's working at a clinic, and she's under this, famous doctor. But she eventually... she's kind of sad because she's supposed to do this like internship program, but she lost out. But she gets a call that actually the person who took her spot has been in a whitewater rafting accident. And so actually there is a spot open in the internship, and would she still like it? And she's like, yes, I would like it. And the guy is like, okay, well, you can't pick your team. You just have to go to where he was going to go. And she's like, bet, I don't even fucking care. I want to get out of this clinic. I want to be a sports medicine person working for a professional team. And so she lands up at the Jacksonville Rays, which is the latest expansion team in the NHL. And so it is here that we see her meeting up with a man that she had previously had a one-night stand with back in Vegas. So they're like, what is happening? What is this? They're on thin ice. Not thin ice, but that's a weird thing. But she also has this relationship that she is kind of cultivating with the team manager, or the equipment manager on the team, because he's the one that picked her up from the airport, and they also live in the same condominium building. But this man is also introduced to us as a bisexual character who's been in love with the man that Rachel had a one-night stand with in Vegas. And the way that the male characters in this book were all kind of depicted, and the way that they were written, really did leave a sour taste in my mouth. Namely, this character, I think his name was Callum. Callum was in love with his best friend, who was the one that Rachel had the one-night stand with. And to me, it read, as I was reading the story, as his dreams had been kind of crushed in the middle of a hockey game. He had like a really bad sports injury that he was not able to recover from in a way that put him back on the ice. And so he was the equipment manager, kind of like, because all he could do but still be around the sport that he loved. And it was kind of written where he had left professional sports, and it had allowed him to be sort of out and explore his sexuality in a way where he was all about the dick. And then Rachel comes into his life, and it's like, listen, I understand that this character is bisexual, but it's not being written in a way where he was like caring about any kind of woman ever. He was still pining over his bestie, trying to suck as much mystery meat as he could get at the club. And all of a sudden he is just dicking Rachel down left, right, and center. And it was just like, I guess she got the magic vagina to like bring you back. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I need to work through some shit. I don't know. But I didn't really like how that was working out, because then even as the story goes on, and even to the next book, it's kind of presented as though like, so it's just this trio. This trio is sort of working things out. They're kind of, feeling around each other. But then we also have this goalie come in. So now it's like there's 4 of these people, and they're all trying to get through this. And I understand why this book is so long, because there are so many love interests. And I do think that Emily Rath tries to like give each man some time with her, but it's a little bit unserious, and it never really gelled for me. But it wasn't the worst thing ever. But then at the end of the book, when they're all getting married, they still have this thing where they do like legal marriages. And so like the legal marriages are the goalie and Rachel, because they're super in love, and the goalie doesn't want to touch nobody's dick ever, although that's a lie. So that's the thing. They can be legally married, and then the besties can get married and be legally married, because that's the thing. And then they can all just be like emotionally, spiritually married to one another. And it just did not work for me. I'm sorry. I just thought it was kind of a fail. And it was a lot of sex that didn't need to happen. Then I read The Secret Life of Church Ladies, which is a collection of essays. This was another thing I just listened to one night at work, and I liked some of the stories more than others. I think that some of them probably could have been expanded into full-length novels, but I understand why this is such a beloved collection of things because I think that they were all very strong. Then I read A Curse for True Love, which is the last book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, and I gave that book 1 star. The way that the characters were written in this series were deeply unserious. This was a complete departure from book 2. It was like I was reading entirely new characters, and here's the thing. I fully understood where this series was going to go from book 1. I understood who the love interest was going to be and how we were going to wrap this all up, but I still don't think that this was sort of executed in a way that was enjoyable to read. Like, this book was just hot garbage. Like, so much things happened. There were so much stakes and so much angst and so much turmoil for these characters, and it was just all so unnecessary. And I still just hate how it ends. Like, I hate it. Even though I knew it was going to happen from the very beginning, I could not get behind it. And the character assassination for characters that I did like was just too much for me. Like, it was deeply unserious. Mars, Earthlings Welcome by Stacey McAnulty and Chicken in Space were 2 picture books that were read to me by Stephanie Bookish on a live stream. So love that for her. And I gave Mars 4 stars, and I did not rate Chicken in Space, but I did not like Chicken in Space nearly as much as Mars. The Mars book is part of a longer series that I was planning on continuing, but then my library didn't have them all, so it just kind of felt like silly. But if you're looking for a picture book, I do think that they are informative and well written, at least the Mars one. Then I reread White Negroes and Cornrows Were in Vogue and Other Thoughts on Cultural Appropriation. This was going to be part of like my anniversary video in July, and then I decided I did not want to continue to reread my favorite books, but this is still a 5 out of 5 star book for me. And if you are looking for a very short nonfiction, then go pick it up. Honey by Isabel Bontug, I gave 1 star. Here's the thing. I am never going to not want to read the pop star book. I'm always going to want to read the pop star book, the actor book, the people in, the wealth of fame and excess. Those are the contemporary fiction I want to read. And 2025 has a lot of them. There's a lot of them coming out. I'm excited about some of them. I've requested some on NetGalley. Like, that is my bread and butter. Like, those are characters that I like reading about. I was excited to read this. This was a Libro FM selection. So I had it a little bit early, I want to say. This book was bad. It was just so bad and boring. It is what all of these books are attempting to do, which is revisit the early 2000s. Let's look at how we treated the women there. We're following this woman as she's trying to become a pop star. We're seeing her setbacks and what's pushing her forward, the way that she can't ever just break through. We're seeing how she's pitted against the other women, and it just doesn't add anything to that conversation. If Honey by Isabel Bonta is the only book in this category that you read, you're probably going to enjoy it a lot more than I do. But because I purposefully seek out books in this realm about this subject matter, and I'm seeing this, same conversation happening over and over again, I'm not impressed. I don't think this did anything necessarily that I care about. To be honest with you, I still think that The Unraveling of Cassidy Holmes by Alyssa R. Sloan is probably one of these genre books that has done it the best in terms of like a one-to-one pop situation. Now, that was a girl group. This book is about, a single artist. So there are differences in that, but I still think that Honey, in the larger scheme of things, is not one of the better books in this situation. I then read Lore Olympus Volume 6, and I gave that 4 stars. It was fine. I don't think that this is a series that you need to run out and read, but I do appreciate them. I appreciate the art a little bit more than the storytelling. I do think that this is a story that has been dragged out for more than completely necessary, but I'm not mad at it either, because I understand that this is a serial form of like telling a story, so I don't really expect it to be short and brief, but I do wish that it was a little bit shorter. One day I was scrolling I think I was on like Instagram, and I came across the author Scott Stewart, and he was reading his picture book My Shadow Was Pink, and so I marked it read on Goodreads because I watched his whole reel, so I saw the whole book. Like, he read the whole book to me. I don't really have an impression on this one necessarily, but it was fine. The art was cute. I think it had a nice little message, so I love that for the people of the world. Then I read Pucking Wild, and I hated this book too. I gave this book 1 star. As I was telling you guys earlier, this is supposed to be about Tessa, I want to say, and Ryan. Tessa was Rachel's best friend, and then Ryan was a rookie on the team. Tessa, like I said, at the end of the first book, everyone gets married, and Tessa is at the wedding because she's Rachel's best friend, and Ryan is at the wedding because they were coming off of a game in LA. I think they won that game, and so like that's why they were celebrating with this wedding. And Tessa and Ryan had been flirting a little bit, and they decide that they are going to dance at the wedding, and that's really all they do because they don't really have sex until much later on in the story. Tessa goes back home to Cleveland or Cincinnati or wherever the fuck she is, and her husband, her ex-husband, I say ex-husband, but he has not signed divorce papers. This is the other problem I had with this book. This is the other problem. So similarly, one second, my computer is about to die. So much like in the first book, I was telling you about how, I think who was a Callum or whatever, was like, oh yes, I'm totally into dudes. All I want is man meat. And then he was out here fucking Rachel left, right, and center. Tessa had sworn off all men, and she had just been hooking up with other women, which is part of why her husband was not signing these divorce papers. But because there were some photos leaked of Tessa at this wedding dancing with another man, and her husband have not really been legally divorced, he brings it to the law firm that they work at, which is owned by his like daddy, like of course it is, or I think it's his mom, his family. It's his family firm. And so he brings it to the firm and is like, hey, she has violated her decency clause because you can see she is out here shamelessly flirting. And I think that we need to put her on paid leave or maybe even unpaid leave. And they compromise on paid leave. And she's like, this man fucks his secretaries and all of you can hear him fucking the secretary. So where's his punishment? And they're like, no, thank you. We're just going to punish you. And then he goes back. She goes back to like pack up her office, and he's literally like holding her against the mirror, holding her against the door, like choking her out in the building. And to me, it was giving the impression that everybody in the office could see that this was happening. So it was very unserious to me. But we also learned, like I said, that he had been like beating her. And that's why she had sworn off all men and why she was no longer trying to be with her husband. And so she decides to run away to Florida to go be with Rachel, but also because one of Rachel's husbands had offered her a position at the wedding. And she was like, I have a job. I don't need this. But now she doesn't have a job. And so she does need his. And so she decides she's going to go and like help clean up turtles. But that has really nothing to do with this book whatsoever. It plays a minor role in the story overall, but it's not super important. So that's what's happening with her. Ryan is excited to be on the team. He's excited to get his first endorsement deal. But then very early on in the book, he gets fucked up in a game and he has to be out for the rest of the season. And so he is he is forced upon him to go live in one of Rachel's husband's houses because now they all live in, I think, what is his name, Jake? They all live in the big house. And so the goalie has a house he's no longer using. It's one story. It's perfect for him. So Ryan is sent off to go convalesce over there. But of course, that's where Tessa is. And so the rest of the book is just them fucking around, finding out. Tessa's husband at some point in the third act comes back into the lives and is trying to like cause drama and mayhem. And it's deeply unserious. It's also important for you to know that her Ryan is illiterate and cannot read. That is a plot point that is brought up a couple of times in the story. It was not really romantic to me personally, but I guess the illiterate need representation too. They can't read the representation, but sure, let's give it to them. But it's also important for me to know that when, so Ryan and Tessa, they're getting close, they're, talking to each other, they're doing their thing. It's very important that Ryan understands that Tessa does not really want to be in anything super serious. Like, she is not trying to get married again. And before Ryan, she had sworn off all men, but Ryan got the magic dick. And so she has sworn off women now, and she's going to be with Ryan, and introduce him to all kinds of like new things that he had never experienced before because he is but a child and she's like 10 years older than him. But it's also important for you to know that, like I told you, Ryan is illiterate. She knows this man is illiterate. And at the end of the book, she decides to propose not once, but twice in ways that he needs to be able to read. The first time she hires a skywriter, and the second time she shows up at a hockey game holding a sign. Both things he cannot read, and both things he has to be read what is happening. And I just, to me, felt like this is another sign that you two should not be together. This woman is also deeply unserious, trying to have anal sex with a man who has not prepped himself. And it was bad. It was bad to me. So like I said, 1 star. After this, I swore off books for the longest. I did not pick up another book until literally it was time for me to start reading for the patrons. And I said, fuck the books. Fuck the books until the beginning of August. So it was bad. I read like Fucking Wild in like the middle of July. So 2 weeks I went without touching a book. But then I picked up Double Exposure by Alyssa R. Sloan because, as I told you guys earlier, I really like her. The Unraveling Cassidy Holmes is a 5-star, and Haley Aldridge is Still Here is another book that I think has gone wildly the radar. So I picked up Double Exposure. It's her first, I would say, foray into true romance, and it did not work for me. It's another second chance romance. It deals with some heavier topics of infertility, of there's another age gap relationship in this one. It's kind of a controlling relationship, definitely a messy, toxic situation. The second chance aspect is fine, but to me, I just think this book had a lot more misses than it did hits. And so I was not necessarily impressed with this story. But I love Alyssa R. Sloan so much, I could not really bring myself to rate this lowly on Goodreads. But I also cannot really recommend that any of you rush out to read this. Only after you've read the first two books and you like Alyssa R. Sloan as an author would I say maybe try this one out. Or if you're just determined to only read something that is a romance and not just a generic general fiction, maybe. But I don't think this is a very strong case for second chance romance. Then I read Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle because this was voted on by the patrons. And listen, I really thought I was going to read like some more queer horror. I thought it was going to be a queer horror that I would appreciate because I had read Surrender Your Sons by Adam Sass. And this is another story dealing with horror related to gay conversion camps. And this just did not work for me. I think the main character was a little bit too old. I think that the supernatural elements were a little bit unserious. Like what was happening was just a little bit, what the fuck? So it was not something I was easily impressed with, and I did not love it whatsoever. Then I read I'll Have What He's Having by Adib Karam, which I'm pretty sure came out on the 27th of August and is not a September release date. So I think you can go pick this up for yourself now. I just love this. I did not love the last Adib Karam book I read. I think it was Kiss and Tell, his boy band book, which y'all know me. I'm here for a boy band book. I'm here for the band books. But that just wasn't necessarily for me. This, we are following older characters. I want to say they're both in their late 30s, like almost 40 years old, which love that for them. I was set in Kansas City, so even though it was across the border in Missouri, it was light. It was really nice to have that Midwest representation. And so we're following what was his name? David, and I am blanking. Farzan and David. And so Farzan is a substitute teacher at the beginning of the book, but he decides at some point in the narrative to take over his family restaurant because his parents are going to be stepping down. He doesn't want his parents to sell it. And then David is studying to be the master sommelier, but he is currently working as like the person in charge of the wine at this really trendy place in Kansas City. And so they meet one night when Farzan is stood up. And so he goes out to have a drink to get over the fact that he'd been stood up on the state that he'd been, all night cooking for. And so he goes out to get this drink, but there's a mix up at the restaurant. And so David thinks that Farzan is actually this famous food critic. And so he kind of dotes on Farzan a little bit. And they spend most of the night talking to one another. And they wind up hooking up with one another. And they understand pretty quickly on that there's been a mix up. I think it's before they hook up that they understand there's been this mix up. But they decide they're going to go their separate ways. Like it was a fun one night thing, but the universe pulls them back together and they come to an agreement that David will help Farzan take over the restaurant a little bit. He'll give him like some advice, and Farzan will help David study for his test to be the master sommelier. And they go on a series of cute dates, and it's just really fun. And both characters I felt had a lot of other people in their lives. It was again a story where people had people who were not just the love interest. So Farzan had a whole friend group that he was a part of that really supported him, particularly in the third act. And then David had a whole, he had his restaurant coworkers, and he also, over the course of the story, reached out to some old friends that he kind of like put on the back burner as he studied for this test, and he reached out to them. And it was just really nice to see these characters having community and letting their community support them and not just solely relying on the love interest in the story. So I think that I'll Have What He's Having is an excellent adult debut. I made so many videos over on the Patreon behind the paywall about Fire and Blood, A Targaryen History by George R.R. Martin. In August, there was like a week, I want to say, where I had off. And so I was like, I'm going to spend my week that I have off watching House of the Dragon, because I've seen everybody talk about House of the Dragon. So I want to watch House of the Dragon, but then I wound up not watching House of the Dragon, spoiler alert, but I did, I did start reading Fire and Blood, A Targaryen History, and I became like the world's craziest Targaryen historian. I have favorite Targaryen rulers. I have least favorite Targaryen rulers. I don't even like the show now. Here's the thing. I've watched like one episode of the show and it was fine. And maybe even watched like 2 or 3 episodes of the show. And it was fine. But having read the book, I just already know that I would be very too bothered to watch the show until it's over. So when the show is over after season 4, maybe I'll go back and watch it then. But for right now, Fire and Blood is the definitive history of the Targaryens. And ironically enough, I can understand why you would want to have a show about, the Dance of the Dragons. But to me, the Dance of the Dragons is like the shortest part of this whole book because of the Targaryen history, the Dance of the Dragons, the warring faction between, Rhaenyra and her little adversaries is like 2 years ish, like maybe 3-4 years. And it's not really necessarily the most interesting part of the history. And it's definitely the part of the book that I felt was, even though percentage wise, there's 50% before you get to the Dance of the Dragons, and then like 50% for the dance and the aftermath of the dance. I feel like the first 50% of the book, the earlier Targaryen rulers, were far more interesting, and they were kind of flattened by the show just kind of ignoring them and kind of changing things around in order to suit the narrative. And so I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I'm definitely in love with it. I had a great time. Do I think we're ever going to get part 2 to this? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're never getting part 2. George has too many things to write, okay? But I can understand why this man is talking about he needs to make a blog post about all the things he didn't like about that show, because even I, a person who didn't watch everything, would already have complaints. So the book is amazing. It's really good. It is not narrated by the same person that does the rest of the series. This person, Simon Vance, is an excellent audiobook narrator. And I think that even though maybe the text is different, I don't know. I don't own a physical copy of this book. Although I'm pretty sure I've purchased like 2 or 3 copies to like send to people over the years. I don't own a physical copy for myself, but Simon Vance's narration is excellent. It does not really read like a history book. It reads like very good narrative nonfiction. If you've read like general narrative nonfiction at any point over the years, then this is, I feel like it fits perfectly in line with that. Again, maybe the text is a little bit more daunting, but this does not read like a textbook. Anybody who's telling you that is kind of an idiot, I have to say. It definitely has a narrative flow to it, particularly with Simon Vance's narration, and it's very easy to follow. I loved every second of it. I actually own the audiobook. Spoiler alert. I did buy the audiobook because I had like a free credit rolling around. So I probably will listen to it again, particularly the earlier chapters, because King Jaehaerys and his messy children have a place in my heart. His sister, was it Rhaena? I think it was Rhaena. His sister Rhaena, love her to bits and pieces. Rhaegar Baratheon can choke on a dick and die. No justice for Rhaegar Baratheon. Anyway, good time. Then I have read a couple of other things we need to talk about. Just 2 more things. The first of which is being Ministry of Truth, Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War on the Recent Past by Steve Bannon. This is a 5-hour audiobook. If you have Spotify, if you pay for Spotify Premium in the United States, and I think Canada has it now, or wherever they include the audiobooks in your subscription, this is only 5 hours. No, I don't know if the audiobooks are the same everywhere. I don't know how licensing works for that. But I do know that if you're in the United States, this is part of the audiobook package. It's included. And so it's 5 hours. You still have like 9 hours, 8 hours to listen to something else. And I think you can find another book for 8 hours to listen to on audio on Spotify. And this is it's like it says on the 10, Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War in the Recent Past. I haven't rated this book, and I haven't really reviewed it yet on Goodreads either, which I will try to do before I edit and upload all of this. The only critique I have is that I don't think this book works as structured. I think it would work better structured if we weren't bouncing around in time a little bit. The chapters are not necessarily in the order of importance, nor are they in chronological order. They just kind of feel like things that popped into Steve Bannon's head at any given moment. But it is narrated very traumata, which I appreciated. And I did feel like I learned some things. And so I don't hate it necessarily. I just feel like it could have been a better, stronger book. Another book I don't really know how to talk about or to rate, and that is How to Hide in Plain Sight by Emma Noyes. I read their debut novel, Guy's Girl, last year because Emma actually reached out to me and was like, hey, can I send you this? And then I saw that email like a month late, and so I just never responded, and I bought a copy and supported them. And this book is so good. Now, don't read this book if you have any kind of issues reading about disordered eating or mental health, and maybe there's some self-harm in this as well. But this was like a toxic-y romance. The romance itself wasn't toxic, but it was interesting. Either way, I was gripped, loved it. And so when I saw that their second book, How to Hide in Plain Sight, which does have a chapter sampler at the end of the paperback, I was like, I like this chapter sampler. I like Emma Noyes. Let me get their second book. And then I got it, and this book was just... Here's the thing. When Berkeley is publishing a book, I do think that I'm expecting a romance. And there was a romance in How to Hide in Plain Sight. I just didn't like it. This is a book that we are following a main character, Elliot, and Elliot is dealing with some OCD issues. We learned very early on that Elliot's brother, Henry, died when she was but a child. And so that kind of had like this really deep impact on her. And that's kind of what led to her family discovering that she had OCD in the first place. Now, she does not have OCD in the same, like in the way that you would probably think about someone having OCD, like with hand washing or, counting or that kind of thing. Like a lot of her OCD, it seems to be more internal with like spiraling thoughts and that kind of a thing, which is what Emma Noyes also deals with. Both of these books are, sort of, I won't say autobiographical, but they both deal with things that Emma has dealt with. So Emma had an eating disorder, and the main character in this book has a disordered eating habits. Emma has OCD, and she wrote about Elliot having OCD. So it's that kind of a thing. So I'm not here to critique necessarily the representation, but it was definitely a focus of that happening in How to Hide in Plain Sight with this dead brother. But then the romance was happening at the same time, where her dead brother died when she was like 10 years old, and then she met her love interest Manuel when she was 10 years old. And there's a recurring theme in the book about her having trouble distinguishing memories with Manuel with memories of her brother Henry, and them kind of like coexisting and kind of canceling each other out. And so she thinks something that might have happened with Manuel, but it's really Henry. That was a little bit strange to me. It was really hard for me to get over. There's also this thing where like Manuel like slots into her family in a very weird way, where it's not only Elliot doing this, but it also feels like her mother is kind of trying to replace Henry with Manuel, and it is a little bit gross to me at times. We're also supposed to be at this book is set around a wedding happening with one of Elliot's family members. And that kind of just, I feel, wasn't necessarily utilized to the best. Like, it was. So much of the events of the book happen because they're there for this wedding and they're in this isolated setting for this wedding. But it didn't really, I don't know, something about it didn't necessarily click. I also only feel like we really got enough time with Elliot and her siblings. And so much was made of the fact that Elliot is so much younger than her siblings because she was the daughter of her dad's third wife. So his oldest child is like 30 years older than her, or maybe even older than 30 years older than her, but he's significantly older than Elliot. And so she's like, oh, I just can't relate to them. I'm not really close to them. But then we see Manuel, who is her age, is also very close to like everybody in the family. And everybody in the family is like holding Elliot at this like arm's. It's just very strange. The dynamics of the family, I don't think really clicked. And the book itself isn't necessarily long enough to kind of juggle all of these things. And so it's not that Emma Noyes was a bad author. I think that it was good, but it just wasn't necessarily for me. And it wasn't what I was expecting, because I do think that Guy's Girl, for all that it touches on and all that it is still at the end of the day a romance between Adrian and Jenny. Is that his name? Yes, Adrian and Jenny. Like it's still a romance. How to Hide in Plain Sight feels a little bit general fiction with a romance happening. And then the romance that was happening, I wasn't rooting for. Like that's also a problem. And so I did not like this book nearly as much. But I do think that Emma Noyes is an interesting author, and one that I will be tuned in to see what they come out with next. But for now, I have finally reached the end of the video. So I'm going to end things here. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys again soon in another video. But until then, and until next time, bye.